and welcome to Ildefonso Inc. Today we are talking about the 1959 Super 400. This is Mothership Gear, where we invite our friends over to hang out at the studio and bring over their favorite or most unique pieces of gear. And today our guest is Dan Bailey, music director, drummer of Father John Misty, and recording engineer. And I am your host, Spencer Alfonso. I'm the creative director and co-owner of Ildefonso Inc., and we are a sync house and music agency. So, Dan, thanks for coming over and hanging. This is our second episode together. Previously, we talked about the Rogers kit in front of you, and today we're going to focus on the snare drum that you brought over, which is Ludwig Supraphonic, but there's a little bit of an asterisk, right? So how long have you had this snare? And then we'll kind of dive into the specialness of it.
Yeah, I mean, I've owned dozens and dozens of various era Supraphonics and sizes over the years. This is my favorite one, which is like the proto Supraphonic. It's kind of before they standardized it into the aluminum shell kind of one we know today. I've had this for, must be 11 or 12 years now. I got it from my buddy Mario Caleri, who plays for Stephen Stills and Ozo Motley and the Wallflowers and a whole bunch of people. Been a real big like drum mentor to me over the years. He called me up one day and was like, "Hey, I already have one of these I've been using for years. I got another one in a trade. Like, you should have it." And so it's like, all right, just tell me how much and we'll figure it out. And it's the kind of heavy brass version. So before Ludwig's popularity took off in the mid '60s with Ringo, and they moved to aluminum, which is a lot easier to make, they made a brass model, which was kind of their flagship kind of top end snare drum. And when you can find them, they're just pretty special and have a real character to them.
Yeah, that's awesome. So now, is this the Supraphonic? Like, what is? How do you refer to it?
It's a brass Supraphonic,
Okay.
Functionally. It has a little bit of a different badge on it and stuff, but they had, because the Supraphonic is kind of the normal, what we think of a snare drum with just the strainer that works, and then they had the Super Sensitive, which used all the same shells, but has the like parallel thing that has the double, all the extra adjustments and stuff. So yeah, this kind of set the template for the drums they were going to make the next, kind of to this day. This is like the first one that's recognizable as like the Ludwig formula,
Oh, okay. So then, yeah, why don't you just kind of play around on the kit with it, and then that way we could kind of dissect specifically how this one sounds, and then more generally how they sound. Yeah, that's great. So to your ears, how do you hear this snare? How would you describe the tonality?
It's one of those things in life, like, is this drum special, or is it the thing that we grew up hearing in every context? So it's like, is a P bass the best P? Like, probably not, but it's just been on 90% of the records ever made, so it's what our brain hears as a bass guitar. Supraphonics are the same. They're so prevalent and so popular that they're just inescapable in music. They're probably on 65% of the recorded music ever made. Some insane number, because they were just everywhere. But I look at like the Supraphonic as like the middle of your snare drum spectrum. It's just like, it's the most versatile. It can do the most things. It's bright enough that if you set it up to be brighter, it can be really bright. It does low tunings well enough to, if you need to be low and dark and thuddy, it can do that too. It's a real, obviously its popularity had everything to do with the brand and who was playing the drums and all that. But they really did make a drum that's good at a lot of things. And so it wouldn't have caught on if it wasn't very versatile. But I look at it like it's the one drum you should see if you walk into a studio or like an engineer's house, or so, it's somebody who records drums a lot. It's an option you should just always have, particularly like a 60s or 70s one.
So what kind of microphones do you like to pair with it when you're recording it at your place?
I mean, my favorite snare drum close mic of all time is the Beyer 201 for sure, the M201. But I mean,
And what about that sounds different than a 57?
Yeah, I mean, 57's obviously, that's a 57 on a Supraphonic. You want to talk about the majority of music ever recorded. The M201 kind of sounds like, a friend of mine says it's like if a 57 went to college. It's just like the low end's a little beefier, the top is a little smoother, there's a little bit of like a mid cut that kind of automatically takes out some of that 300 hertz nonsense that's always in a snare drum. They just, the spectrum, if you look at the chart, it just, that sits really nice on a snare drum. And it sounds like a 57 you've done little EQ moves to already, more or less.
Mm-hmm. And then what do you use on bottom often if you're pairing that with the Beyer Dynamic?
Pretty much any dynamic mic. If I'm going for something kind of raspier or brighter or kind of chalky, maybe like a lot of texture, I'll use something like an old Electro Voice 635 or 664, like old dynamic mics. But if I want something more hi-fi, I might also do a M201 on the bottom, or I've been known to do like a 414 or a CAD E100 on the bottom. Like if you really want that like hi-fi bottom snare decay thing, like putting a condenser down there, we'll get that for you. But yeah, pretty much, it's one of those drums that like, it's just going to sound like whatever, it's so adaptable to conditions that like kind of any mic you point at, it's going to sound pretty good.
What makes it so adaptable?
I think it's another like chicken or the egg kind of thing. I think they respond really well in the middle tensions. So the way the snares response is set up, it's very like, you can go pretty loose and it still be musical, but you can go tight and it won't choke. Like there's something about the snare bed on them that's very good. I think they just like kind of accidentally did a lot of things right because they didn't have to change anything. It's like Leo Fender with the Telly or the Strat. It's just like the guy hit a home run the first time out, So I think the drum is very good, and then it just was, the drums themselves were so popular that they just became ever present, and so I think it became the like kind of baseline snare drum overall for that reason.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about this in terms of the episode with your full kit, but just for the snare episode, what heads do you have on it today? What do you put on it when you first get one? And is there anything that you tend to do when you set up a vintage snare for the first time, or stuff you look for?
Yeah, I mean, when you've got it all apart, you're ready to put new heads on it. Obviously, like, I try to do a decent job of like going through and checking all the the screws on the lugs, make sure we don't have anything loose or rattly or like stripped out or broken, something that's going to cause you trouble once you're trying to use the drum. Right now, I've got coated Ambassador over Ambassador snare side, which is what I do with almost every snare drum I own, just because it feels like those are the heads that allow the drum to do its thing the best. So if I have a handful of snare drums, I want them set up to where their differences are being highlighted. So I kind of always go coated Ambassador. Wires, just the stock Ludwig replacement wires, the 20 strand, whatever, they ship drums. I feel like those wires do the thing they do to their drums really well. And you can find them most places and they're like $20. They're not one of the like $50 replacement wire things. But that feels like it gets it as close to like stock, and it really highlights the things the drum does well.
Rad. And then, so have you had to switch out hardware on this at all, or typically do you? Yeah,
they've got a couple of Achilles heels, which is the strainer and butt plate will tend to strip out, but
okay,
that's also like a $30 fix. They're not, they luckily Ludwig makes modern replacement parts that fit the same hole spacing, so you don't have to modify the drum. One of the really smart things they do is offer kind of OEM parts for their old drums. But yeah, that's another thing. Almost always, I just assume that the strainer needs to be replaced, and I'll put like a new P85, which is their model number. Just when the drum's on the way, I'll just go ahead and order one because I know it's more than likely it needs. It's going to be slipping and kind of rusted and stuff. So.
And then when you're on the road, what are you using? Are you going for the Supraphonic sound on the road, or are you going for something different uniquely to Father John Misty, or?
It depends. Our gig has a real hard time with snare drums and ride cymbals. Like it feels like kits are very easy to find that can do our kind of like 60s psychedelia kind of wall of sound thing. But then also finding a snare. The problem when you do kind of 8 or 10 genres of music inside of a set is like what single snare drum can do that. I don't take this. I have taken it on the road a bit, but I don't, now that they're becoming harder and harder to find ones in good condition. And I've now played this on a bunch of records that are important to me, so I don't want, I don't want the drum case to go missing and, on the road or something, and have something that's hard to replace, both nostalgically and otherwise. But yeah, I mean, this is, the Supraphonic sound is such like a touchstone, just like a P-bass, like we were talking about, that like I'm always chasing some version of this thing. And so usually like a 5-inch deep, like aluminum drum of some kind is kind of where we end up sitting. But I've only played, in my 10 years with the band, I've probably played 5 kits on the road for various different reasons. But I've probably tried like 45 snare drums.
Wow.
And we've never really, I mean, this would be the one, but I'm not willing to do that. So unless someone can clone this for me exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I've been playing a Rogers Dynasonic wood drum on the road the last little bit, and it's been great.
So what about the wood drum gets close to the brass? Like how'd you guys land on wood?
Usually we end up, I've got the other, so at any given point I'll have 2 drums on the road because there's one could break mid-set or whatever. So I've always got one either with Chris, our tech, side stage, or like on the riser hidden somewhere. And I usually do one metal drum, one wood, just because different venues, we've all like taken a snare drum out of the case at the club or, at a studio or something, and it sounds terrible. It's just
Totally.
but this sounded great at home and will sound great at tomorrow's gig, but for today it sounds like trash, And so having I find that more often than not, if you like take a wood drum and a metal drum out of the case and kind of hit them both in a room, you'll immediately go like, that's the one, it just responds to the space better. Because if you're doing, we'll play maybe like a 2,500 cap theater, but then a festival the next day, which is in a big field. And then we'll go to Europe and play some underplay clubs, but then we'll play a half house arena. The venues we play are, depending where we are in the world, can be a lot different. And so having an option where you can kind of tailor to the room is kind of important,
Yeah. Do you find that when you're outdoors that you lean towards one or the other?
Yeah,
or?
usually a metal drum outdoors, just because it has a little more aggression and kind of like high mids that'll cut a little more, and it feels like it just feels like the drum is doing something when you hit it. Sometimes when you're outdoors, it just feels like the drums are not giving you anything back.
Yeah.
Because distance and not having walls to bounce back at you, just... And when you're hearing a PA 50 feet in front of you that's 30 feet off the ground, it's just... the drum itself isn't really doing much for you. So yeah, any help, both feel-wise, metal drums tend to feel a little stiffer, so it feels like you're getting a little more response, and that those high mids have a little more cut. But then a wood drum is less abrasive, and that's so that, sometimes that extra abrasion, you take it inside like a theater, and on a stage with a big vaulted ceiling and stuff, It sounds crazy, and you want the mellower, more subtle drum,
Are you guys doing post-processing reverb on your snare? Are you putting specific plates to get a specific sound for the audience, or even for your own in-ear mix? Or are you often hearing the ambience of the actual venue in your ears?
I like my in-ear mix to be as dry as humanly possible. So I don't take any reverbs. Some of the other guys might, but I just ask for because when you have a big PA in a room and stuff, it feels like there's activity out there, and I just want the most kind of accurate representation of what I'm playing, so that I'm not hearing, so I can actually kind of tell what the drums are doing and giving back to me and stuff. So I know at front of house, Jacob, our front of house guy, has different patches for different tunes and all kinds of stuff like that. But at least for me, I like to keep things as dry as possible.
So you're kind of leaning on your own understanding of the arrangement and how you have that relationship with your front of house where he's doing what he needs to do to translate it, but you're more focused on your own patterns and your own arrangement and making sure that you're just getting a one-to-one.
Yeah, just trying to play it well.
Yeah.
And then, that'll give him something to work with,
Nice. Sweet. Well, thank you so much for bringing the snare over. And where can people find you if they want to follow along?
Yeah, Instagram, .com/D Richard Bailey, and then also over at Patreon /D Richard Bailey, where we do kind of day-to-day session drummer, studio engineer stuff, and you just kind of follow along with my work process, and we dork out on drums and recording, and it's a good time.
Sweet. Well, thank you guys for tuning into this episode of Mothership Gear. And you guys can follow us at ildefonso.co or follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Ildefonso Inc. And we will see you all next time. Bye.